When a young couple gave their daughter up for adoption, they never expected to see her again. When they finally came to reunite once she turned 18, they all began to grow closer very quickly. The daughter's relationship with her own biological father, though, became far, far too close. Right now, I would like to thank the sponsor of today's video, Impregnate. This is because recently I've been trying to find someone who can remove all of my information from marketing databases that I've never consented to be on. It's very hard to find a solid, definitive list of all of these companies that take your data and spread it all over the internet. There have been numerous data breaches from different platforms throughout recent years that have been gradually leaking more and more and only adding to the problem. Requesting to be removed off of all of these could take you years to do manually. That's where Impregnate comes in. You can just make an account on Impregnate and they will send a data protection law compliance request to all of these different companies and demand that they remove all of your data from these different companies' databases. In-app, you'll get a dashboard that will show you the day-by-day progress in getting your data out of the hands of these different companies. They'll even deal with any objections from their side. Not only do companies get your information so that they can market off of you, they also get as much data as they can to build a customer profile of you and sell it to other companies as well who will use it however they please. They can get your names, aliases, social security number, usernames and passwords, and even your physical home address and specific online activity. It's pretty easy to see how that could all go bad fairly quickly. These companies have even taken out massive debts in people's names without them even knowing it, putting them into a lot of debt and completely ruining their credit. Cyber criminals from an underground platform called SSN-DOB were even caught stealing people's social security numbers and other info from large data brokers like Dun & Bradstreet in order to steal their identities. It's really crazy what they can get their hands on these days. Impregnate easy. Just make an account, give them the right to work on your behalf, and let them get to work. So take back your personal data with Impregnate. Just use my code DIRETRIP at the link in the description below to get 60% off an annual plan. Impregnate is available risk-free for 30 days, so there's no harm in trying it out. And now, on to the content. I think it's safe to say that we've never really covered a story quite like this one on the channel before, and to be honest, I don't really have any words, so let's get right into it. Our story begins when a 20-year-old man at the time named Stephen Pladl was using the computer back in the early days of the internet in 1995. While browsing around, he came in contact with a girl named Alyssa Garcia, who was 15 years old at the time. Stephen was living in New York while Alyssa was down in San Antonio, Texas. They were both pretty intrigued by talking to someone from such a distance back when that wasn't so common. The problem was, Stephen really took a liking to Alyssa and tried to convince her to get into a relationship with him. They talked online very often and even started sending love letters back and forth, something Alyssa's parents really didn't take a liking to. Stephen even came down to San Antonio to meet Alyssa, something that her parents strongly opposed but didn't outright forbid. Soon after, Alyssa ran away with Stephen to go back to New York and be with him. It didn't take long at all for Alyssa to get pregnant at the young age of 16. 9 months later, after she turned 17, she gave birth to her and Stephen's first daughter, a girl they named Denise. From the very beginning, they were anything but a happy family. Stephen found Denise to be extremely annoying when she cried, as all babies tend to do. This would send him into fits of anger, causing him to spiral out of control. Alyssa has since said, "He would yell at the baby. He didn't bond with her. He didn't take care of her. He rarely held her." According to Alyssa, Stephen would pinch Denise hard out of spite until the girl was covered in black and blue bruises all over her.
He was verbally, emotionally, and mentally abusive throughout our 20 years together. He did do many violent things. He had nearly beaten to death one cat and did beat to death another cat. He would go long periods of time of not talking to his family. He was extremely isolated. Any friends he had were mostly online. He owned many guns. He couldn't keep a job. She would cry and it would just instantly trigger him. He would curse. He would tell me to shut her the hell up. He would at times scoop her up and place her into a big cooler that we had. And then sometimes he would just shut it tight. He knew it was possible she could be dead, and he was not fazed by it. So I would finally go back there and open it and get her out. He was a special kind of scary to me, and I did not know how to get away from that without getting myself or Katie killed at an even younger age.
Putting a baby into a cooler and locking it closed is without a doubt extremely dangerous. Alyssa would always wait a few minutes until Steven seemed to be looking away before running over to the cooler and pulling Denise out. She would always be gasping for air and drenched in sweat afterwards. She would rock her back and forth while explaining to her that she was sorry for the life that she was born into. Eventually, she decided that enough was enough and that Denise deserved to be with someone better. One major roadblock was that Alyssa didn't want to tell anyone about how Steven really was. So instead, she told everyone that knew her that, due to her depression and inability to cope along with major financial problems, she would have to give their 8-month-old baby up for adoption. Little did anyone know that the real reason was fear that Denise might not even make it out alive if things continued for much longer. Denise, being put up for adoption, ended up being accepted into a new home fairly quickly. She was adopted by a nice couple named Anthony and Kelly Fusco and taken to live with them in Dutchess County, New York. Alyssa was distraught, but in the end she just wanted her to have a happy, normal life. Denise had her name changed to Katie Fusco and began to live a very normal, calm life in comparison to what she had experienced before. She grew up in Dover, New York, as her memories of her original family completely faded away very quickly. Raised alongside Anthony and Kelly's biological daughter, she found a nice home to grow up in, and they quickly became the only family that she ever knew. She was much more lively, becoming a talented artist in her youth, taking an interest in making her own comic strips specifically. In her own words, she told everyone, "A pen and something to draw on became a safe place for her." She loved to eat so much that her family would call her Pac-Man, as she was able to scarf down pretty crazy amounts of food for such a little kid. Despite that, she was a vegetarian, having a strong soft spot for animals. As she got older, Katie developed a strong desire to go on to college and get into the advertising field. Meanwhile, things simmered down back at the old Pladl home. A little bit. Despite all of the previous abuse, Alyssa decided to stay with Steven for many more years. In fact, after living together for about 10 years, the two finally went on to get married in 2006. Just 1 year later, the couple decided to start all over, moving out to Virginia and giving birth to another baby girl. By this point, Alyssa felt that the both of them had matured a great deal and they were ready to be actual parents. A few years after that, in 2012, the couple had another new daughter. And it seems that this time, Steven didn't do anything to hurt them physically. Throughout the years, Alyssa mainly worked while Steven never really could hold down a job. It's unknown what Steven really did with his time, aside from being an Amazon product tester, but he did develop a strong love for guns, and he owned about 5 of them himself. He was able to purchase all of them legally, as he had no criminal record. Still, despite Steven not really working or contributing, Alyssa did feel that things were getting better, because at least he wasn't treating their 2 new daughters in the way he treated Denise at all. However, Steven still had a major temper and would often throw tantrums as he chucked furniture around the house and punched holes in walls. While he didn't physically abuse the daughters, he would treat them badly by humiliating them if they ever did anything that he didn't find tolerable. For example, there was one incident when he made one daughter sit in urine-soaked clothes in a bathtub for hours after wetting herself until Alyssa came home to change her. She was only 3 at the time, shivering by the time Alyssa got home from work. The older daughter was on the autism spectrum, and Steven would often use this information to berate her, calling her a retard straight to her face. Things got even worse when a cat wandered into their garage one day. Steven didn't like cats, so instead of letting it out, he decided to beat it to death with his bare hands and throw it into the garbage. Alyssa never really was able to get past her feelings of guilt when it came to giving up her first daughter. It was especially hard whenever Katie, who they still knew as Denise, had her birthday come around. Alyssa said, "I went into a really dark place for a long time. To help myself cope with it, whenever her birthday would come around, I would find a picture of her or think of her. Every January 29th, I would say, 'Happy birthday, Denise, I loved you.' I hoped somehow she could sense it." This wasn't the case, as back home, Katie was none the wiser that she was even adopted in the first place. That is, until she turned 18 in January of 2016. This was when her parents decided to let her know that she was indeed adopted. Katie had a strong desire to meet her birth parents and see what they were like, so she began to do her own research in order to find them. It didn't take too long, and she sent Alyssa a message online reading, "Don't know if you're okay with this or not, but I thought I'd give it a shot. Hi." Alyssa, not knowing that Katie's name was ever changed, didn't know who she was and felt that the message was likely just some spam. But then after that, Katie decided to message Steven instead with some results that she was able to acquire via a genealogy website. They all decided to meet, with Katie hopping on a train to Virginia in June of that year to see her birth parents for the first time. Alyssa said, "Her voice sounds like mine. Even though we weren't around each other, we spoke in the same way. She was a black sheep in a good way, sort of like me. She stood out from the crowd. She was an independent young woman. She was funny. She was sarcastic. Seeing all those traits in her was amazing." They all hit it off surprisingly well very quickly. Only a few days later, Alyssa and Steven even drove out to Wingdale, New York to attend Katie's high school graduation. Despite originally wanting to go on to college, Katie was so enthralled with her new family that she decided, for the time being, to move in with them at their home in Henrico County, Virginia. Her adopted parents were very cautious about the whole thing, but given that Katie was now 18, there wasn't a whole lot they could do. They said that she was now old enough to make her own decisions and thought that they would support her. However, Katie didn't know that things weren't going so well behind closed doors. Although Steven and Alyssa seemed happy in the few times that they had met, the two had actually been separated and merely living together in different rooms for months at this point. Steven had gone back to being cruel towards Alyssa in the recent years, constantly going into fits of anger, insulting her, and harassing her. She said, "I was always on eggshells. Whatever his mood was, everybody knew, and that mood was often not happy. A lot of yelling, a lot of things smashed in the house, in front of our kids." When Katie came to live with them, Alyssa told her privately that Steven had abused her as well as a baby, going into detail about what he had done, and told her the primary reason for her being adopted was so that she would be safe. Alyssa was surprised to see, though, that Katie didn't seem at all bothered by that revelation. Despite hearing about Steven's frequent angry outbursts and seeing them firsthand, as well as his unpredictable temper and his love for guns, she was wholly unconcerned. Within a few short months, Katie got very close with Alyssa, Steven, and her two new sisters. However, she got a lot more close with Steven as Alyssa was often gone at work doing her job as a supervisor at T-Mobile. Steven came to share his love for guns with Katie, often taking her out to the range to shoot together. It was pretty surprising to many how quickly the two really hit it off. Steven began to act very strange. He started showing all of the signs of being in a midlife crisis after meeting Katie. He began to wear skinny jeans and much tighter-fitting shirts. He even shaved his beard and started to grow out his hair. He started to spend more and more time alone with Katie, even coming to fall asleep on her bedroom floor while talking to her. Alyssa found this pretty strange and told him so, but he didn't seem to feel anything was wrong with it. When it happened the next night as well, Alyssa confronted Steven about it, which sent him into a rage. He threw things around the house, all while screaming, "How dare you suggest anything is going on between us?" The thing is, though, Alyssa, by that point, didn't assume that anything sexual was going on. She just felt that it was strange she would continue to sleep in her room. Steven said that what he did was none of her business and left home. With Katie. Katie assured Alyssa that nothing was going on. She was merely trying to help keep the peace. After that incident, Katie's relationship with Alyssa began to sour as she preferred spending time alone with Steven. Alyssa felt that Steven had most likely been telling her something or another in order to get her to mistrust her. Unable to handle that her relationship with her daughter that she wanted to meet so badly was ruined, on top of everything else, Alyssa decided to move out of the home with her two daughters and leave Steven behind. Katie chose to stay with Steven. For a while, Alyssa and Steven shared custody of their daughters, although Steven seemed very preoccupied and didn't show a lot of interest in seeing them. Their older daughter didn't like going to stay with Steven and Katie and made that very clear, although she wasn't willing to say why. Steven asked Alyssa to speak with her, saying that she acted up whenever she came to stay with them. Alyssa, unable to get anything out of the girl, couldn't resist temptation and decided to read the recent pages in her diary. There, she discovered the shocking truth in her own daughter's handwriting. She began to shake and vomit as she read each page. Coming to see drawings of Steven and Katie with devil horns, the writing surrounding them filled Alyssa in on what had been happening behind closed doors and why their daughter was so uncomfortable. Right there, the daughter wrote, "Katie is pregnant. Dad suggests they're behaving like a couple. Was it a drunken mistake? He refers to Katie's child as his own. Did he cause her pregnancy? He even calls her my stepmother now. He doesn't want me to address her as my sister anymore. Katie is my sister, she's probably his wife now, but in nature she's only my sister. Does she see me as a daughter or a sister? My father's behavior is utterly shameful. He won't suffer in hell, rather he'll be the one torturing people. If he's Satan and Katie is human, does that make the baby half demon? Continuing with doodles of Stephen and Katie as devils, she wrote, "My dad is a slut. He's Satan. He's fucking Satan." Alyssa, now about to lose her mind entirely, immediately called Stephen and demanded answers. She shouted at him, "Is there anything in this journal I should be concerned about? Is Katie pregnant with your baby?" To this, Stephen simply responded, unbothered, with, "I thought you knew. We're in love." Alyssa asked him if this was the real reason that he had pushed her away and tried to rush their divorce, asking if it was because he wanted to marry Katie. He said yes. Stephen then informed her, shockingly, that Katie's adoptive parents even knew all about it. He said that, while they didn't like it at first, they had come to accept it, and shockingly, he wasn't lying. He ended by saying that they weren't going to change for anyone, and if anyone found out, they would simply leave town and disappear. This is actually a real phenomenon called genetic sexual attraction. It usually occurs when two close blood relatives who never knew each other growing up meet as adults. When they reconnect, they feel an unbearable attraction to one another. This usually happens more often in siblings that get separated at birth, usually in the adoption or foster care system, but it has happened on rare occasions with parents and children too. Alyssa, fearing that something might happen to their other daughters, immediately contacted the police and informed them of the situation. She was granted an order of protection. Both Stephen and Katie were banned from contacting Alyssa or her daughters, and vice versa. From the time that Alyssa reported the incest to the police, she began to live in constant fear that Stephen would blow up into an angry rage like she had never seen before and probably come to kill her. She had co-workers walk her to her car after work every night and feared even slowing down at any intersection on the way home. Little did she know, the shock of her life was yet to come. This came in the form of Stephen and Katie getting exactly what they wanted, that being getting married. Stephen and Katie's wedding was held in Parkton, Maryland on July 20th of 2017. Given that Katie was adopted and had a different last name and different parents, it was pretty easy to say that they weren't related in any way. They simply lied about their relation for the marriage paperwork. Even more surprisingly, both Stephen's mother and Katie's adopted parents attended the wedding, smiling happily as if nothing strange were going on. Katie's adopted parents, Anthony and Kelly, said that they found it challenging to support this union, but in the end decided that there was nothing they could do and the best course of action would be to simply support their daughter in whatever she wanted to do. Stephen's mother simply found the whole idea of her son marrying her granddaughter odd, but didn't seem to oppose it. In photos taken of the wedding, you can see all of the guests smiling happily together. In one picture, Stephen is seen embracing a very pregnant Katie near the water. Katie posted the pictures online to social media, simply writing, "Nothing fancy, just love." It goes without saying that all of this hit Alyssa very hard. All of those feelings of disgust and betrayal came rushing forth once again as if it were the night she read the diary all over again. She screamed at Stephen to herself, wondering how he could be acting like this with their own child. The police did come out to investigate Stephen and Katie's union, even going as far as interviewing the two other daughters about the whole thing, but nothing was immediately done. Stephen lawyered up himself, and this lawyer came to defend him pretty passionately. He said that Stephen simply had a strong crush on his daughter that was so overpowering that it made him forget that they were blood related, saying that his marital problems with Alyssa were likely the source of it all. Alyssa wasn't really going to take any sort of psychological argument as a justification for the whole thing. She responded with a simple, "They were all there for an incestuous wedding and she's pregnant with his baby. How they could be there celebrating is beyond me." Katie gave birth to her and Stephen's child on September 1st, a baby boy that they named Bennett. Luckily, he didn't appear to have any health problems. The couple, wanting to start fresh, moved into a home in a cul-de-sac in Knightdale, North Carolina, living together with Stephen's mother, who supported the whole thing wholeheartedly. However, their happy life as newlyweds wouldn't last too long. 4 months later in January, the police finally arrested both Stephen and Katie on warrants for incest, adultery, and contributing to delinquency. Alyssa felt that Stephen deserved whatever was coming to him, but Katie really needed to be in therapy.
I do want Steve to get punished for what he's done. Once you cross that line, there's no going back. There's no way I'm ever having him around his daughters again. I think he needs to go in jail and he needs to pay for what he's done. I don't think prison is the answer for her. I think she needs to get some therapy. I think she needs to get some help. I really hope that she realizes how truly young she still is and that she has the chance to start over. And I hope she can.
The two were actually looking at a full 10 years in prison if they were found to be guilty. In the meantime, Stephen was released on bond after paying about $28,000. He was ordered by the judge to stay away from Katie, and she was ordered to stay away from him as well. Being unable or simply unwilling to move back to North Carolina, he decided to shack up in a hotel in Virginia for the time being. Katie, however, remained in custody for much longer. Of this, Alyssa said, "She's a breastfeeding mother. She's in there struggling emotionally and physically. But he's used whatever financial resources he can get his hands on to get himself out, not her. That should tell you all you need to know about what kind of husband and father he is. There is no way I'm ever having him around his daughters again. I think he needs to go to jail and pay for what he's done." Throughout the entire thing, there never was any hint that Stephen actually pressured Katie into being in a relationship with him, and it was treated as if the two had made their own choices. Stephen's lawyer, Rick Friedman II, said, "This case is an 18-year-old girl who shows up at the doorstep of a 40-year-old man who's going through difficult times with his wife. They have a bond because they're biologically related, but they never knew each other before they had a sexual relationship. He was head over heels in love with her, so much so that it outweighed the issue of them being biologically related." Custody of the new baby, Bennett, was granted to Stephen's mother, who continued to take care of him. Katie was finally bailed out herself, and, being forbidden to see Stephen any longer, was allowed to leave on the condition that she moved back in with her adopted parents. Katie was allowed to go visit her grandmother in Connecticut on Tuesdays and Thursdays, which was her only outing. Given that they legally weren't going to be able to contact each other any longer, Katie really had no choice but to end things with Stephen. She called him up on the phone, which she wasn't even supposed to do, and told him over the phone that she was breaking up with him. Stephen couldn't handle hearing that it was all over and gradually began to lose his mind even more than he already had. With Bennett living with Stephen's mother, he had full access to his son. After all, the courts never placed any sort of restriction on his contact with him. This is something that was considered to be a major failure by the courts, given that due to their son, Stephen and Katie would still have to remain linked together in some capacity. On April 10th, Stephen came over to his mother's house to see his son. He asked her if he could take his son back with him to Nightdale so that he could talk with Katie over Skype. His mother agreed, despite the clear court orders to have no contact with Katie at all whatsoever. Stephen went home with Bennett, the two alone in the house together. Stephen decided that it was now time to put his plan into motion. He suffocated his son, and when the deed was done, he hid his body in the closet. Now, Stephen was going to enact the next phase of his plan. He called up his mother to tell her what he had just done, calmly telling her that he had killed Bennett and was leaving the home. He told her that he would leave the home key out for the police to use in order to get in and find the body. His mother then called the police while sobbing.
"Yes, my son just called me, and he told me he killed his baby, and he's in the house. And I can't even believe this is happening. He left the baby dead when he left. Oh God! He told me to call the police, that I shouldn't go over there."
Okay, so the son is so your son is not there?
No, the house is empty. He said he put a key under the front mat. A key to get into the house under the front mat.
The police came out to the home, and indeed, they found the boy's body buried under various clothes and other items in the closet. They were absolutely going to arrest Stephen, but by this point they had no idea where he might be. It seems that he didn't tell his mother anything about what he was going to do next. Stephen had completely vanished that night with nobody knowing where he could be. Little did anyone know he had already driven 600 miles away, semi-automatic rifle in hand. The next morning he arrived in New York. Stephen had somehow come to know that Katie was visiting her grandmother in Connecticut twice a week every week like clockwork. He figured that this would be the best way to ambush her. Katie's adopted father, Anthony, was a former Coast Guard and corrections officer. He would drive her back and forth to Connecticut, escorting her along the way. While this was definitely an emotional time for Katie and her family, these outings gave them some sort of a sense of peace amongst the chaos. This specific outing, though, wasn't going to be anything like what they expected. Stephen waited for Katie and her father to pull out of their driveway and head out to Connecticut. Once he caught sight of them, he began to follow them in his own vehicle. He remained out of sight, tracking them for quite some time. Eventually, Katie and her father came to stop at a stop sign in a rural location. Stephen felt that there would be no better timing to make himself seen than now. He hopped out of his car, rifle in hand, and began to spray bullets into Anthony's truck. He fired so many bullets into the car that there was no chance that either of them would survive. Both Katie and her adopted father died quickly right there in that truck. People in the area heard gunshots and notified the police. The local police came out to find the bodies of Katie and Anthony in the truck. They quickly began an investigation, but Stephen was nowhere to be found. Stephen had driven out to Dover, New York. There he enacted the final phase of his plan. He turned the gun towards himself and fired. Once it was all over, Alyssa, still in Virginia, was notified vaguely of what had happened to Stephen. She didn't know many of the other details, having to take to the internet to even find out the extent of what had happened. Typing in self-inflicted gunshot wound New York, she quickly came across the grisly details. She was greeted with the sight of photos of Katie and Anthony along with various crime scene photos of a blood-filled truck. That's how she came to know that her firstborn daughter was dead. She was left to tell the other two daughters what had happened. She had to tell them that 3 of their family members were now gone. When they demanded to know why, she had to tell them that their father had ended the lives of the other 2 before ending his own. She had never seen such a look of shock and horror quite like that on their faces before. In less than 24 hours, their father, nephew, and older sister were all gone. After the murder, Stephen's lawyer was left very shaken. Although he knew that Stephen was a weird guy for sure, he never got a violent vibe from him. He said that he had had breakfast with him only a month prior, and it seemed that things were relatively normal given the circumstances. He said, "This really bothers me a lot because nobody ever could have predicted this. If anybody had a remote idea anybody was in harm's way, there would have been no bond set. There was just absolutely no prior notice anything would happen to these people." Many people close to the case were left with very little to say. Everyone was shocked enough when Stephen and Katie got married and had a kid, but this took it to a whole new level. The officer working on the case said, "We may never understand the mindset or motives of Stephen Pladl, but we do know his actions have shattered the lives of countless people." Katie's neighbor and family friend in New York was briefly interviewed, still being flabbergasted. She said, "We are all still in shock. It is truly unbelievable. I am at a loss for words. It is a tragedy." Within a week, Katie, Anthony, and Bennett were all buried in a cemetery in Dover Plains, New York. Everyone was left with nothing to really do but contemplate the aftermath of everything that they had all been through throughout this entire bizarre incident. Alyssa placed no blame at all on Katie, Denise herself. She felt that it was more likely that Stephen had groomed her and convinced her to get into a relationship, much in the same way that he had convinced her to do all those years ago when they first met online. She didn't know how, but she felt that in some way or another he had seduced her and started this whole mess himself. She stated to the media, "There are no words to describe the sense of betrayal and disgust I'm feeling. I waited 18 long years to have a relationship with my daughter, and now he's completely destroyed it." Stephen had taken her daughter once when she originally had to give her up for adoption. He took her once again when he ran away with her, and he took her again one last time when he killed her. Now Alyssa is left with nothing to do but try and move on, which is easier said than done.
Hearing that he murdered her and the baby and the father, it took the wind out of me. I was just sobbing. I was weakened. I felt like I was falling apart. It's been a difficult roller coaster of emotions because I am so devastated by the loss of Katie and her adoptive dad and baby. But it is such a relief to know that I don't have to look over my shoulder anymore to see if Steve is there.
She ended with these words, "I'm grieving. I'm sad. I'm upset. But I also want to have something good come out of this. if it's to get truth out there to open people's eyes to incest. Once again, thank you for watching my video. If you found it interesting, please give it a like, it really helps me out in the algorithm, and feel free to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. This one is definitely one of the weirder ones as of late, so I appreciate you sticking around for it. Just recently, I've started up a podcast with 4 of my friends called the NBR Podcast. If you like this channel, you might find that one interesting too. I've also opened up a merch store there you can get your hands on some cool Dire Trip t-shirts, link in the description below. If you want, go ahead and follow me on social media, and I really appreciate when people follow me on Patreon. There you can get videos early, ad-free, and uncensored. Channel memberships are up too, and you can get the same benefits there as well. So, this has been your host Kyle, thank you, and good night.